Right, the next macronutrient we're going to talk about is carbohydrates, and these are can be in the form of simple sugars, which are our candy, fruits, and quickly the sugars or the glucose is absorbed into our bloodstream, and it can elevate our blood sugar. And complex carbohydrates are more like your grains and pasta. They require more time to break down, and so you'll have a slower increase in your blood sugar. And carbohydrates, if you recall from the breakdown, usually 50 to 60% is the recommended percentage of our daily caloric intake. Some intensive training may require athletes to consume up to 70% of carbohydrates in their diet. And so it's our major energy source for intense exercise. Our nervous system only relies on carbohydrates for an energy source. And our muscle and liver glycogen, which are storage forms of glucose, are synthesized from carbohydrates. And so carbohydrates are really important for athletes to maintain their muscle glycogen or their energy supplies, and it directly affects the ability to fuel their training bouts. So if an athlete does an intense workout one day, they need to replenish their glycogen stores through their carbohydrate ingestion so that they have adequate glycogen available for the next day for intense training so that they can achieve the training results that are desired. Your book doesn't talk about it, but there is a term called glycemic index, which people who are diabetic, weight control, and athletes sometimes pay attention to as far as carbohydrate ingestion. And what the glycemic index is, it rates foods on how quickly they elevate your blood sugar. And we really want foods that don't pop our blood sugar up quickly, because if we elevate our blood sugar quickly, we're going to have a release of insulin, which is going to lower the blood sugar even more. So most athletes want to eat foods that gradually and slowly elevate their blood sugars. And so that's, if you look at any tables for glycemic index, you'll be able to see what types of foods quickly elevate your blood sugar. As far as carbohydrate ingestion, in athletes who do intense aerobic training, it's very important for them to replenish their glycogen. And usually 7 to 10 grams per kilogram body weight per day will replenish their glycogen if it had been depleted by an intense workout. For athletes who do just shorter bursts of effort or strength training, they usually can go with just 5 to 6 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate ingestion. And once we deplete our glycogen, it usually takes about 24 hours to restore our muscle glycogen. So anyone involved in intensive training, it will be important for them to quickly after their exercise bout to start to consume carbohydrate in an effort to maximize their glycogen stores. We're also looking at fat, and fat is, if you recall, one of our major energy supplies for oxidative energy production. The more aerobically trained our muscle, the more likely we're going to use fat for energy production. And fat is stored as triglycerides. It provides most of our energy, especially at rest. But excessive accumulation of fat is linked with health disorders such as heart disease and cancer and diabetes. So athletes, even though they're expending a lot of calories, maybe don't have a lot of body fat, they still have to be conscientious about the fat that they're taking into the body, because it can affect cholesterol and heart disease. But fat does serve a variety of functions. It cushions our organs, it insulates our body to help maintain our body temperature, helps form cell membranes and covering nerves. And our fat-soluble vitamins are stored in fat. And so the most basic unit that we can break fat down into is fatty acid. When we talk about fats, we talk about if they're saturated. And saturated fats are more from animal sources. They're more solid at room temperature, so the fat on a steak, butter, as opposed to unsaturated are from more plant sources, and they're liquid at room temperature, so that's corn or safflower oil. We also have monounsaturated fats, which are like our olive oils. And then you'll see also on some products hydrogenated fats. And hydrogenated fats are where they add hydrogen to a product, and it makes it more saturated, so not as healthy a type of fat, but it improves the taste of the product and it extends its shelf life. So because our muscle and liver glycogen stores are limited, with intense effort, that we have about 2 hours worth of glycogen stores. Fat is a source of energy that we want to be dominating our long periods of effort, because fat is an unlimited supply on our body, and it can delay the exhaustion that comes when we deplete our glycogen. So endurance athletes who are their muscles are very oxidatively trained will use fat as their primary energy source. And diets, as far as the athletes and fat consumption, they don't usually recommend athletes follow highly restrictive, low-fat diets, like around 10%, that some people who, for health reasons, might be prescribed. And they find that diets that are less than 15% fat might actually decrease testosterone production, so that it might affect our ability to synthesize protein. And as I mentioned before, that of the fat that we take into our diet, we want most of it, or 20% of it, to be poly or monounsaturated fats, whereas just 10% to be more the saturated fat for health consequences, not just how fat our body is, but what type of fat we're taking into our body. Because increased fat is associated with many diseases such as heart disease, hypertension, diabetes. Their HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, actually decreases when people are obese. But one of the issues with athletes, many times they feel they can consume whatever they want because they're not fat, and so they can consume high saturated foods, but high saturated fat can elevate your blood cholesterol and make you more prone to heart disease. So there's other factors besides just how you look and the fat on your body. Vitamins are micronutrients, so we don't need those in a large supply, but they're very important for growth and maintaining our health. And they act as catalysts to initiate and speed up chemical reactions. So we have different types of vitamins. We have fat-soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K, and they are stored with lipids or fat, whereas water-soluble vitamins, usually we excrete any excessive amount of these types of vitamins that we take in. So if we overly supplement or consume fat-soluble vitamins, we might exceed a normal limit for the amount that our body needs to store, and it might become toxic. Minerals, we consume those in smaller quantities. They're necessary for normal cell function. The ones that we tend to really think about are calcium, which we need for our strong bones, and iron, which is very important for hemoglobin and for oxygen transport. And when you look at your products that you're eating, they usually have the daily recommended intakes, which show us how much we should consume for a healthy diet. And in general, if we're eating a well-balanced with a diet with a wide variety of foods, we should be fine without having vitamin and mineral supplements. We should be able to consume it in our foods. But if anyone's eliminating certain foods in their diet, maybe they don't eat meat, dairy products, or they have an illness or a deficiency, then they might be recommended to take a multivitamin or mineral supplement. As far as fluid intake, our thirst, by the time we start to feel thirsty, we already are dehydrated, and so we can't rely on just the thirst mechanism to make sure our body is well hydrated. So even at minor changes in our fluid levels in our body, even 2 to 3%, that can result in a decrease in performance. So fluid intake is very important for performance, but it's also necessary to decrease our risk for heat stress situations. And so the average intake to offset any losses that we have with exercise through sweating, through respiration, we should take in 1.5 to 2.7 quarts of fluid a day. And that includes fluid in our food, fluid in our coffee. It doesn't have to just be water. Before exercise, we should make sure we consume or take in fluid to make sure our bodies are hydrated before we actually start exercising. And so we want to consume fluid like 4 hours before to prevent overfilling our stomach, and then we might need to have some more 2 hours before exercise. And the color of the urine can be very indicative of our state of hydration. And then during exercise, every 10 to 15 minutes, we should be replenishing fluids. It is very difficult to keep up with the amount of fluids that we lose while we exercise. So it's more kind of putting off a level of dehydration. Even though we might not be able to fully hydrate, we're able to put off some of that severe dehydration. And then after exercise, we want to do body weight before and after, and for every pound loss we should ingest 20 to 24 ounces of fluid to replace that. And we have to reinforce to clients that the scale weight post-exercise is not reflective of fat loss but just of fluid loss, and that it's necessary to replenish those fluids. And signs of dehydration: a real dark yellow urine. It also can have a more pungent smell. Someone might not urinate as often, might have a rapid resting heart rate, and more muscle soreness. And sport drinks, we see many people drinking sport drinks. Sport drinks are meant to rehydrate, but also they have a carbohydrate source, so they help prevent muscle glycogen depletion. And so for events that last over 60 to 90 minutes where we're starting to really use up muscle glycogen, those are primarily the cases where we want to make sure we have a sport drink, because we're taking in glucose so we don't deplete our glycogen, and we're also rehydrating. And the reason why water for events less than 60 minutes is almost preferred is because when the carbohydrate in that sport drink, we consume it, it actually slows down the emptying of that fluid into the rest of our body. So it slows down the ability to rehydrate. So in general terms, only events over 60 to 90 minutes do we really want to be using sport drinks. They also can be used to replenish electrolytes that we might lose with increased intensity effort.